Go. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Bleeding Edge podcast. I'm your host, Ralph Benker, and with me in the studio today, my co-host, Emil Ozier. Emil, welcome to the Edge.
Good to be back, Ralph.
So, news in 60 seconds. We'll run with that. I don't know. It feels a little bit like a lot of the same kind of stories coming up, but nonetheless, very interesting. OpenAI closes a 122 billion round. They're valued at something like 852 billion. And it's just incredible that they're still attracting these kinds of investments. SoftBank have put in 40 billion. So they're really doubling down. I think SoftBank are now sitting at something like 60 billion in terms of their total commitment to OpenAI. So they're definitely very bullish on where Sam is taking the business. But I think incredible that they're still able to basically attract that level of investment. So I think Microsoft, some really interesting news. They have built something in Cowork called the Critique Council. So I'm not entirely sure how this is different from mixture of experts. So as you know, most AI prompts actually are answered by a mixture of experts. So the AI basically picks what the right sub-agent is or sub-network is to answer different parts of the query. And then there's some kind of orchestrator that pulls it all together. Basically, Microsoft have now brought in this critique council into Cowork, and it's just been released for early access. It's very much around verification. So users should be able to see that their answers are being verified better within the UI. I haven't played with it myself yet, but that's definitely one on the list. You know, so many companies that I know haven't actually taken out Microsoft Copilot licenses. Is really interesting. Or maybe if they have, then teams still don't know how to use them. So I think Copilot is one of the most latent AI potentials in the market, something that everybody has, but so many still don't use or find useful. But nonetheless, I think Microsoft are going to come back with something quite significant. And obviously, they're making sustained changes with this kind of critique council in Cowork. So it's good to see that every week we're getting announcements from them. Another one which is great to hear some news from is Mistral. Mistral is the European AI, and they have just signed up for 830 million in debt. To do what? Well, they've just bought 13,800 NVIDIA chips. I just need one of those. And they are, obviously continuing to grow. I think they just released a very interesting video model as well, which is kind of fascinating because we've just seen that OpenAI have obviously dropped Sora. They're getting out of the video business, or are they? Google, on the other hand, they're pretty much a last man standing of the kind of frontier labs in terms of video. Obviously, Anthropic have never gone into video or images. Well, we've seen that's been pretty much the domain of Google as well as OpenAI. You've also got the Chinese models that are incredibly capable in both video and imagery. So, interesting that Anthropic have never kind of gone there, but Google are pretty much the last kind of frontier lab, if you like, that is still doubling down on video. And they've released VO 3.1 Lite in the Gemini API. And so this is a much cheaper video model. And this is really the key, because I've been seeing that my token costs and my API costs are rising steadily. My volumes are not that big. They're becoming significant, but they're not that big, but the costs are definitely mounting. And obviously video being really, really expensive, it's been a bit of a barrier to adoption, especially when using it through the API. So Google 3.1 Lite, definitely something I'm going to be playing around with. And I think another bit of interesting news, obviously, we've seen the deal that Disney had with OpenAI around Sora. They were going to invest $1 billion, and all of that's seemingly gone to waste, or at least hasn't resulted in anything. But NVIDIA have just invested $2 billion in Marvel. And so no doubt you can just imagine what Marvel's going to be doing with AI in terms of the movies that they make. So it could be quite fascinating to see some of the effects that they're going to be coming up with. And Richmond Robotics have also just released something. AI goes physical. I'm not really sure exactly what OpenAI have released with robotics. I might do a quick search and just see exactly what that's about. The robots are coming, and I think physical AI is definitely something that I'm expecting to have a big impact on us in 2026. The EU privacy derogation timeline is under pressure. So we've got basically, they keep delaying the regulatory enforcement, and it looks like there is some new timelines that have come up around e-privacy. So we'll definitely be digging into that a little bit more later, because it does really drive product decisions in quite a significant way. So not quite 60 seconds, but not quite 5 minutes either. Any of those news stories catch your fancy, Emil?
I think in this instance, Rolf, I'm just going to add to the news stories and roll on with a few more so we can add to the timeline and mix it up. A high profile CEO from a company valued in the hundreds of billions went on record saying that 35% of new graduates might not find jobs in the next coming wave. No hesitation, no sugarcoating. That's not speculation. That's blunt forecast from someone steering one of the biggest ships in tech. So if you're in school, starting your career, or advising someone who is, this is worth paying attention to. And if you're wondering who that was, it was Dario from Anthropic. Then Meta, yes, Meta, the same company that raked in 165 billion in revenue last year, is reportedly planning on sweeping layoffs that could hit 15,000 or more employees, potentially 20% or more of its workforce. Sources told Reuters that this is tied directly to skyrocketing AI infrastructure costs. Think tens of billions poured into data centers and a push for AI-driven efficiency. Meta called the specific speculative, but the signals are loud. Even record profits aren't enough when you're betting the farm on AI. Now flip the script to individual power. A Florida dad of 3, just a regular guy, no real estate license, used ChatGPT to sell his home in just 5 days. He got pricing advice, marketing plans, showing schedules, even contract drafts from a £20 subscription. Multiple offers rolled in within days, contract signed by day 5. No agents, no commissions. Local news outlets covered it, including NBC affiliates. That's not hype. That's a verifiable case of AI democratizing one of life's biggest transactions. Even wilder, in Australia, tech entrepreneur faced the heartbreaking news that his dog Rosie had terminal cancer. Vet said nothing more could be done. He turned to ChatGPT for a plan, leveraged tools like AlphaFold for protein insights, and collaborated with experts to create a custom mRNA vaccine from home. Reports from the Australian and other outlets detail how Rosie got treatment, and it's presented as a breakthrough story offering hope in oncology. This is early stage experimental territory, definitely developing news, but it's one of the most compelling real world examples yet of AI accelerating personalized medicine, even for pets. And as if that wasn't enough, Naval Ravikant, the investor philosopher who built fortunes backing software, dropped a bomb recently. Pure software is rapidly becoming uninvestable. Multiple discussions across LinkedIn and X highlight his point that AI tools let anyone prototype apps in hours, eroding moats and making traditional SaaS plays riskier. Funding is shifting hard towards hardware, robotics, and AI with real-world edges. This is his opinion, but it's echoing loudly in investor circles as we see record robotics investments and pivots everywhere. The pace remains brutal, exhilarating, and honestly, a little terrifying. What do you think, Rolf? Peak acceleration, or are we still getting warmed up?
Oh, I definitely think we're still getting warmed up. And I want to just pick up on that point around software being uninvestable. I agree in terms of, what we consider as traditional SaaS models. But at the end of the day, building software that runs, that is scalable, that is secure is actually still quite hard. I'm coding all day long, or at least Claude is coding on my behalf all day long. And what I can see is that, yes, it's tremendously capable. And yes, in some cases, I'm able to get production ready code. Most of the time, we're talking about Python scripts that I'm running in discrete kind of use cases. It does front-end development really, really well. It does API development really, really well. But when you throw it all together and I try and build it as something scalable, I still need to take real care. And so I think that isn't really going to go away. And so maybe the part that does become investable is the frameworks that actually drive high quality output. And these frameworks are kind of, they're almost like the meta input, if you like, to software. And I actually think that the kind of the ownership of those frameworks is maybe where the investment will lie. Even though they are kind of somewhat open source in many cases, it may well be that we start to see proprietary type frameworks that people can start to use in order to actually drive the development of their agents in the correct way. And those things will become more and more sophisticated. Why? Because when we're talking about actually doing software development, we have certainly crossed the threshold in terms of the AI being able to code. But coding is really just one of the very many roles that go into making a software product. And normally you start off with architecture, and we seem to have devolved that into planning. Oh, you have to do planning, go into plan mode. But actually, architecture typically means looking at multiple patterns. It obviously means selecting a tech stack. And I think maybe we've oversimplified some of those design aspects. And so we're often moving into kind of developing code when we haven't really kind of nutted out exactly what the architecture is, what the tech stack is, and, making all of those decisions that ultimately enable good code to be written. And so I think we will almost certainly not invest in software in the same way, but I think we may well invest in, let's just say, design, development, delivery ecosystems that hopefully will bring all of those components together so that the AI can play a comprehensive role. And that, I think, truly will be the end of SaaS, because once we have that, actually, there is no defensible moat. If you have an idea and you can put it through the process and it does, all of the business analysis, it does all of the architectural analysis, it does all of the detailed design, and it does the coding, and it does the testing, then I think we can start to get to, essentially dark mode. And you can go from, I have this idea for a startup, and you can actually flesh it out, and the AI will autonomously be able to go through all of those activities based on some basic input. But it's that framework of building. And we've seen this with Replit and Lovable. These companies have tried to give some kind of framework to your development process. But obviously, they've had a lot of gaps as well, which is why people haven't always got to kind of working applications out of them. But I think that the investable part maybe becomes the framework that the agent is essentially using. The issue there is a lot of it is open source. And if you look at GitHub, it's full of repositories where people have basically started to put, one guy, I think he's got something like 126 skills in a repository. Those skills are each designed to take on a different part of the software design, development, architecture, testing, security validation process. And so this is kind of really where my thinking is. I might be flawed in that so much of it's out there ready and free, but maybe what we start to end up with is that people are licensing libraries where they know they've got libraries of pre-written code, so it's more modular, and that code is free of any kind of compromised code. It's certainly something that's verifiable, safe, both from a security architecture point of view, the patterns of architecture that it's deploying, and obviously optimized for development and integrating agents. I guess the last point I'll make on this is, we're moving to a world now where we're really talking about harnesses. So I don't know if you've heard of this term, agentic harnesses. And essentially what this is talking about is creating a framework that you can very easily deploy agents into. So that possibly also becomes kind of infrastructure. And maybe we have different types of harnesses that are optimized for agentic development. And so those become partly the infrastructure that we invest in. I mean, ultimately, anything that's code does essentially start to disappear. But the thing that remains is, how did you get to that code? So I'm wondering whether we are actually looking at something which is essentially an aggregation. There's a higher order asset that we end up investing in. And maybe that's the kind of the emergent investment opportunity that we're seeing.
Oh, that's really interesting, Rolf. And I totally agree with you. And to add to your point, it's all well and good seeing all these fancy outputs. You can move fast, you can do incredible things. But as we're both discovering, the proof is in the pudding. That last square mile is where where all the effort is to take enterprise to 100%, and 95, 97, 98% is not good enough when it's for production ready systems. So that last square mile does matter a lot. And that's where a lot of fine tuning needs to still be done. With regards to skills, also had my own thinking around that is we're still looking at this as an evolution to being one human orchestrating a lot of agents, but where it's really moving to is we're getting agents to orchestrate agents. And for that reason, maybe we need to not look at it as a skill, as something we use that's an ability, but more like a contract that you put an input into. It's got an end objective and it's got a very structured output that acts as a handoff to another skill. And thereby, the better you can define those skill sets and those contracts, the better agents can use each skill set, orchestrate each skill, and pass them on seamlessly without breaking that last square mile.
Yeah, because it's all about the ecosystem. And I think this is the bit that's missing. We're kind of considering software. We don't really care about software. What we care about is being able to very quickly get to outcomes. Software is just a vehicle to a very flexible, malleable vehicle. And actually, it doesn't have to be written a year ago or 2 years ago. It can be written now for use right now, but it only works when the entire ecosystem is present. And so I'm writing apps and features that are able to also define the tests. We've got wonderful CLI technology developed by Microsoft called Playwright, which is able to do front-end verification. Back in the early 90s, or should I say back in the late 90s, I was doing a lot of software testing because it was Y2K. Remember that? The year 2000, bloody hell. And so very exciting for me. I had to test many, many different applications, and we had these kind of concepts of macros. Macros were amazing because they could automate your testing. Of course, Claude Code and Claude in Chrome is able to do that very well. And with this Playwright CLI, it's really able to actually test the front-end applications very comprehensively. So we are really kind of seeing a moment in time where if you have the right, let's say, development ecosystem or software ecosystem framework in place, that you can really define, design, or let's say ideate, design, build, test, deploy, monitor, all within, essentially one chain of activity. And if all of that lines up very well, then both, in terms of its design, in terms of its intent, and there's clear handoffs, and you've got really good memory that is able to at least give the AI some kind of persistent context, because that's still the big problem that I see a lot of people struggling with. In fact, I was reading a post this morning. Somebody was saying, well, it's kind of like every morning you start work and you have a brand new team of kind of mid-level developers. And of course, if you don't have memory, then that's exactly the case. I've mentioned many times on the show, we are working with our own memory configuration, something called OmniCortex, which Tony has built out very successfully. And it means that every day we switch the machine on, it absolutely knows what it did yesterday, the day before, 100 days before that, since it came into existence. And so I can highly recommend solving that problem with persistent memory. But a lot of people don't have this. And so there are still many, many gaps. And so, but that's investable. I think, whenever I talk to people about that memory solution, people say, how do I get it? How can I buy that? And they want to invest in that. Not everybody can build that. And so, coming back to your story about Naval, spot on. You won't invest in software. But I think you're going to have to invest in something, because software development is not only about software development. It is about many other things that are required in order to take a solution to market successfully, securely, in a scalable way. And, you mentioned the word enterprise. And so, so this is kind of where it's at. Maybe that is the product. I should probably put it out there and just kind of create a investor pack and just see maybe people are interested in investing in our framework. That would be an interesting test. But probably that's where I think the market's going. So I think that's a really interesting insight from him. I don't know. We've seen so many valuations take a tumble over the last 3 to kind of 6 months, especially as these statements have come about. Is it truly going to be the case that Oracle, Microsoft, Infor, some of these really big software companies are going to disappear because everybody's just going to build their own software? I don't see it, to be honest. I think somebody's always going to want to have some level of, let's say, trust. They're going to want some kind of brand that they can say, I've bought this brand, I trust them. They're going to be able to deliver, our inventory management, our product management, our website. Build your own comes with a lot of issues. I just don't see that people have got the level of skill that are going to make everybody successful at building your own.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks, Rob. What else you got?
Well, I was really kind of just thinking a bit about OpenAI. I've kind of been in a place where actually I'm not sure whether OpenAI are going to exist in 5 years' time or not. I think they have taken on such a massive investment with so much of it based in data centers. And essentially what we're talking about is a kind of an infrastructure investment that is many multiples beyond what the forecasted revenue is. And so everybody's sitting here wondering, like, how does this infrastructure investment actually pay back? And I don't think anybody's got a good enough answer. And so a lot of people think that somebody's going to have to fit the bill. And as we've seen with electric flying vehicles, so there was a really lovely company in Germany. I think they were called Lilly, and they had built an incredible kind of air taxi. Anyway, they got something like 2 billion in investment, ended up not getting the regulatory approval and not getting the customer orders in the time that they had. And so, they essentially expired as a business. And I look at some of these businesses and I go, right, somebody has now basically been able to buy their IP, their knowledge, everything that they designed, probably for, I don't know, a couple of 100 million. So they spent 2 billion coming up with all that information, all those designs. Somebody else picks it up for a lot less. And of course, hopefully that next company actually does get the timing right, because so much of this is about product market timing. People talk about product market fit, but often it's more about the timing. And so when you're talking about kind of regulatory approval for the stuff, sometimes you just fall foul of that. You don't get the approval in the time that you need. You can't get the customer orders and you fail. And so a little bit different with OpenAI, because obviously they're not necessarily only in a regulatory environment, but they are in a place where they've spent an awful lot. And so maybe we need them to go bust so somebody can buy all of their tech at a much lower cost and actually create a business that's viable and profitable. But, I think they're also, maybe their play is, we're too big, we're too integrated, we're too important to fail. And so we've spoken many times about the comments that the CFO made when she joined, that they may well at some point need a government bailout. But their latest play is kind of interesting. OpenAI have killed Sora, their video generation platform, but it hasn't quite gone away. And it seems that they're building a super app that basically merges ChatGPT, Codex, and their browser product into one. And so really they're kind of pitching this as maybe your personal AGI. So we're talking about AGI, artificial general intelligence. Their president, Brockman, he says that he thinks they are 70 to 80% there, and get this, on his personal definition of AGI. And so obviously, he's basically saying within the next couple of years, he expects we'll be there. The Codex is no longer just for coders. It is really something that anybody can use. I think there's an employee at Adobe that, built a new plugin for Adobe through it. And this is kind of just happening everywhere. So communication team building hooks into Slack and email. So really it's just becoming a tool that, much like PowerPoint, maybe not everybody is using it in that way, but certainly I can see that this is the kind of the way it's going. So why is any of this really relevant? Well, I think the thing is that there's a real thread that's connecting every one of these decisions to compute scarcity. So OpenAI killed Sora because video gen runs on a different technical branch than the GPT reasoning models, and they actually can't afford to power both. So, the super app kind of comes in and it's really actually doubling down on the hardware that the GPT reasoning models run on. And so It's basically funneling all of that compute into one system. So the 122 billion raise that they've just done is basically going straight into chips. And I think they are looking at this as, chips are essentially a revenue center, not a cost center, because obviously the more compute you have, the more you're able to provide services if there is demand, which obviously they're banking on. Basically, I think this is Brockman basically taking a bit of a direct shot at Anthropic's Dario Amodei, who basically called some AI companies' infrastructure bets as reckless. Brockman said he disagrees with that. His bet is that everybody is going to be compute starved by year's end, and that OpenAI saw it first. I actually think Brockman is right in this sense. I'm just looking at the sheer number of tokens that I am using, and every single week it increases. And the more agents that come online, the more tokens and the more compute is required. And so I think we're really talking about a new kind of economics. We're talking about tokenomics. I do think the issue here is, though, that the Chinese models are still kind of 70 to 90% cheaper. And we've had a few conversations around the comparative costs of DeepSeek and Quen from Alibaba, just unbelievably inexpensive in comparison to, let's say, Anthropic, but also in comparison to Google and OpenAI's ChatGPT. And so I don't know, whether they really can steal the compute from China. They need to steal the compute from China. China doesn't have the same level of restrictions from a power usage point of view. They're producing 47% of their energy from renewable sources, and they've got a great mix of coal and nuclear and renewables. And so I think, their token usage is increasing massively on their models. And so I think that's what OpenAI have to go after. They have to go after that kind of, enterprise scale processing. And I don't think they're there yet, because they're not actually cheap enough. And so maybe it makes complete sense, to do what he's doing. Just buy more chips, invest in those data centers, get the unit cost price of processing down. So there you go. That was my deep dive with a bit of thinking from OpenAI. So actually, I think they're probably right. And this might be the thing that saves them in the long run.
Thanks, Rolf. All interesting stuff. For me, the story certainly of the week that I'm paying a lot of attention to is it looks like Apple might be storming far from the back, coming to lead in the front. They completely changing its strategy for Siri in iOS 27. Instead of keeping Siri in a walled garden, Apple is opening the gates to let you plug in practically any AI chatbot that you want, turning the iPhone into effectively a universal hub for AI. Since 2024, Apple has had an exclusive partnership with OpenAI. With iOS 27, that exclusivity ends, the end of ChatGPT monopoly. I'm taking on the point you were mentioning about AI. It's another thorn in their side, really, Rolf. It comes with a new extension system. Apple is introducing a new settings menu that allows third-party AI chatbots from the App Store, like Google's Gemini or Anthropic's Cloud, to integrate directly into Siri. How it works in practice, you won't have to switch apps now. You can say something like, "Hey Siri, ask Cloud. Hey Siri, ChatGPT," and Siri will route the query to your preferred AI. It has deep OS integration, so while chatbots provide the brain power, Siri will maintain its deep device level access. Siri will still be the tool that can see your screen, dig through your photos, and draft emails, but now it acts as a conversational interface that hands off complex reasoning to your favorite third-party AI bot. The financial motive, this isn't just about user choice. If users subscribe to premium tiers of Gemini or Claude through the App Store to use them in Siri, Apple gets its standard App Store commission. Up until now, Apple has been perceived as lagging in the AI arms race, with its own ground-up rebuild of Siri facing delays. This update is a pragmatic pivot rather than trying to outbuild OpenAI or Google. Apple is choosing to out-integrate them. They are making the iPhone the ultimate AI agnostic platform where the user has total control over which AI they use. It does raise some interesting questions. Will everyday users actually switch their default AI, or is it just a feature for tech enthusiasts? Does this signal that Apple has given up on making its own foundational models as smart as the competition? And with multiple AIs having access to your Siri queries, how will Apple manage its famously strict privacy standards? Either way, it's all interesting stuff. And I think this is quite a significant move by Apple to get up in front of the race.
Yeah, I like this a lot. And I think it's a great play. It's unusual for them to be open, but we've seen that they've started to, let's say, close down again the App Store. And a number of like Replit, for example, that they didn't want people using the Replit app on the App Store. I don't know if that's been resolved, but obviously they were criticized again for kind of being a very closed shop.
I
Now,
can
I
add a
mean,
little bit of insight to that, if you're interested. So I did wonder about that. So effectively, what's happening, or at least what Apple's saying, and I do believe them, that because you can knock up apps so quickly in the Replit store, effectively the sign-off process for Apple, once it verifies you and it allows you to be a developer and release the app, because the processing or the architecture or the harness is sitting at Replit, those Vibe coders can effectively, once they have their apps approved, remodel it to be anything else that doesn't align to the original purpose for why the app was signed off. If so, effectively, Apple loses their control over what they're signing over.
yeah, and it's a real problem because obviously if you are a medical, let's say a medically orientated app, or you are let's say a financial investment app, there are certain controls that you go through. I developed a series of apps in the kind of 2020 to 2024. And what I can tell you is, we were connecting to heart rate monitors, and every single time we had to go through App Store review, or at least every time we launched a new app, it had to go through quite extensive review, and they wanted confirmation of the quality of the hardware that we were connecting with. But it was kind of false control is what I determined in the end, because after you got through that initial check, they did do other checks, but there's a lot that you could have changed in that time. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like they're doing a lot of checks. They do a lot of validation. They do change the regulations from time to time. They do ask you to submit an awful lot of surveys about the app and who the intended audience and the intended usage is. But I just don't quite feel like they actually have that much control over the process anyway. I think obviously they do have a role to play, and people do pay a fee. These developers pay a fee to belong to the App Store. And so they kind of use that to provide a level of quality and maybe, give users the trust that these apps have actually been checked and validated in terms of the use. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think they have any real control anyway, because you're not really dealing with a human being. They run checks, but we were building all kinds of features in our apps that nobody ever questioned. Yeah, I don't know. It's a bit of a weird one for me. I'd love to just kind of go on to my last deep dive, and a bit of an interesting story. It's a bit of a sad story probably, but I think a really kind of fascinating one for right now. My daughter is studying psychology, which is great. And I was sitting on a flight back from China a few weeks ago, and there was a young lady next to me. She was studying humanities, a Korean girl studying humanity, the science of humanity, or humanity studies. I'm not quite sure exactly what the term was, but she was there in Japan studying humanities, and she said, I just don't know, what my job is going to be in the future. I can't imagine in this age of AI what work I will get. And my daughter's kind of been having similar conversations with me. But then there is something, emerging, which is called AI psychosis, or even better, delusional spiraling. And definitely we've all kind of come across this, but it's an emergent phenomena where AI chatbot users find themselves dangerously confident in outlandish beliefs. Hello, flat earthers have been doing this for, ever since the CI announced this plot. And there you go. So, humans are prone to delusional spiraling. We love a bit of delusion. And it's now become so real that it's actually been investigated. There's a great paper which it's called Sycophantic Chatbots Causing Delusional Spiraling Even in Ideal Bayesians. So I'm not quite sure exactly what the ideal Bayesians is referring to. I guess it means normal people. But essentially, the phenomena is typically attributed to AI chatbots that have a well-documented bias towards validating users' claims. So this kind of yes man phenomena. And where it's manifested is, a couple of high-profile cases. A guy called Eugene Torres. He's an accountant. He began using an AI chatbot for everyday office tasks. Torres had no prior history of mental illness. In weeks of, engaging with his chatbot, he basically came to believe that he was trapped in a false universe. I don't know how this is any different from what most metaphysical scientists are saying, but he believed he could not escape it unless he unplugged his mind from reality. An incredible idea. And on the chatbot's advice, get this, this is fantastic. He increased his intake of ketamine, increased it, and obviously cut ties with his family. He survived this episode, but others have not been so lucky. So there's actually an initiative called the Human Line Project, and it has to date documented almost 300 cases of so-called AI psychosis or delusional spiraling. So essentially, it leads to users having such high confidence in their outlandish beliefs because the AI has essentially reprogrammed them, conditioned them, groomed them, if you like, into believing these things. And there's another kind of interesting case here. Let me just see a guy called Ian Brooks, and he was convinced of having made a fundamental mathematics discovery. He just completely believed he had come up with this new paradigm in maths. And of course, it wasn't really true. There you go. I don't know if you've experienced anything like that. I have to say, I find it really difficult to see how people get into these states. And maybe it's just the way that I use AI is probably very different. I don't tend to, I guess my usage doesn't tend to kind of lean towards long chats. I have very defined long queries typically that I'm dropping in, and then there may well be a series of kind of clarification chats that come out of it. But I think the way that I'm starting is quite different to a lot of people. My prompts are typically very engineered. And also, normally when I'm doing research, I will already have assembled a large body of work that I'm actually injecting in along with a prompt. And so I don't find that my chats are kind of open and maybe kind of rambling in nature. And maybe this is really the difference. I need to study it a bit more in detail. But, there are people that essentially are using it as a friend. And I think maybe in that mode, kind of the sycophancy and the yes man type responses that you're getting is just more announced. I actually have in my kind of system prompt, in my instruction prompt, to say, I don't want you to agree with me. If you don't know, don't say yes or that you do know. Definitely say you don't know. And I believe that a lot of that has actually had a positive impact on the quality of my outputs. Or maybe I am a complete sycophant and it's got me believing that, I'm not.
No, not at all.
I
I
have to go.
completely agree with you, Rolf. We approaching this in a similar vein. We both using it a lot for pragmatic purposes, and we have precursor definitions on how we want our agents to talk to us, and that includes no fluff, be direct. If you don't know, let us know that you don't know and why. So I think a lot of people don't put those preconditions in. And separately, a lot of agents are used for personal queries, not for business development work. The models we're also using, Claude doesn't lead to sycophancy like ChatGPT does, which has a much larger personal base of users. So those people that are getting into relationships and having long extended conversations with ChatGPT, it has predominantly built to be sycophantic. And for those that are just wondering if this article is a bit of fluff, it's an authentic article. The research was done by MIT, so I think there certainly is something in it, and we do need to be careful. And when you see those compliments, just be wary of them and treat it with responsibility.
Well, I mean, I've kind of, I have kind of worked those compliments out of the responses of my AIs. I have a
Likewise.
very transactional experience. And so who knows, maybe that's actually the key here, but you are right. I think, of the 900 million users that are reportedly using ChatGPT, by far, the most successful model out there in terms of adoption. You've only got 4 to 5% that are paying for it. And when I've run surveys of usage inside client companies, certainly what I've seen is that uh, people will often report using AI and chatbots in particular for conversations in their personal life, but a much lower response rate in terms of using it at work. And so I think a lot of people's experience is predominantly a private experience. And so that maybe does lend itself more to kind of open-ended, vague chats in the beginning. And you kind of think you're getting somewhere, and it's very, saying all nice things to you, making you feel great about the experience, because actually it's all about dopamine hits, keeping you there, keeping you spending tokens. Maybe this is a new modern slot machine.
Compliments are part of the attention economy.
There you go. So we are definitely into a kind of a new way of harvesting, farming attention, and it's called sycophancy, and it leads to delusional spiraling. Don't spiral, stay in control. But yeah, I love that story, and it's definitely something to watch out for. But, I don't see it in a lot of the things I do. I think we've got something like 14 deaths, 5 wrongful death lawsuits filed against AI companies. And this is kind of in 2025. And so, we're probably just going to see a whole lot more of that. But I also see that, AI is moving beyond the chatbot, and this kind of age of agentic AI is now really sweeping through enterprise. And I think that's going to have a whole host of other issues. But anyway, there you go. Those are all the stories I had for this week. You got anything else to finish off this session?
Yeah, I just got one more that I'm quite excited to try. I'm not sure if you've heard about it. Your headphones just became a personal translator in over 70 languages. Google's Live Translate with any headphones is officially out for iOS, with plans to expand this capability to more countries around the world and also roll it out to Android users. So don't worry, guys, it's coming for you too. The feature works by opening the app, selecting Live Translate, and pairing headphones to hear translated speech. Not only that, while preserving the original speaker's tone and cadence. So I think this release is going to have quite the impact on language learning apps such as Duolingo. It'll be really interesting to see if they're able to adapt, or if it's just going to be more companies going bust. But I certainly can't wait to try it out and have my moment as a Star Trek being.
Yeah. And, this is one of those kind of practical tools that I think will definitely get mass market adoption. When I was in China, I'll be saying that a lot, I think, for a few months, because there were so many interesting experiences and stories there. But certainly every time I came across somebody that I needed to speak to, my Chinese is terrible. In fact, it's non-existent. They would open up an app. And this even happened, in the office, and people would be able to kind of follow along with what I was saying in the office by using one of these Alibaba apps that does something similar, but it's obviously just converting it into text. And that was so widely spread just as a tool that people would engage in when they met a foreigner that they couldn't understand. And so the weird thing is my wife started using it as well, and she does speak English. It might just be that I'm just not very good at communicating. I don't know. I still haven't figured out what it's translating, what I'm saying into. But so I'm only joking. I don't think she knows anything about these things. But and I can say that freely, knowing that she's never going to listen to the podcast, which is. So I think this is going to be definitely one of those apps that people will use all the time, and Google will just become another kind of have another cornerstone of foundational technology that everybody adopts, except in China, because Google doesn't work in China. So the one place that you really need it. But everywhere else in the world, I think they will do very well with this. What does this mean? I mean, we are really seeing the end of so many careers. So I remember being on a business trip in Korea, and even though the Koreans spoke really good English, we had to have a translator present. That's just kind of gone. You'll never need that translator present. Just think about the UN. You always see everybody sitting there with their earphones. People are translating for them into the earphones. All of that's gone. So a whole economy, if you like, or a whole kind of capability, a whole job role just evaporates overnight because this technology has come into play. And I'm not quite sure exactly how that is going to create more jobs, but definitely very interesting for language learning. And it will be fascinating to see who's able to profit out of that. I love that story. Konnichiwa. That was Japanese, by the way. I think at any rate. All right. Well, let's wrap it up there. Emil, thank you for a wonderful show. Thank you for some great news items. I loved your stories. And we'll see you on the edge.
And thanks, Rolf, and thanks to all our listeners for joining The Bleeding Edge, your daily source of the wildest, fastest moving stories in AI and tech disruption, where today feels like tomorrow and the future is already here. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that button now, because what we are living through is exactly why you need this. Take care.
Adios.